The other book that that has been an inspiration to me is called Sabbath in the Suburbs by Marianne McKibben Dana. And that's the cover there. And this is about, it's called a family experiment with holy time. And it's written by a pastor, a working pastor serving a church with kids and a husband, and reflecting on the fact that taking a whole day off a week to do nothing is impossible in the family structure. And so what did that mean for them? And how do they observe the Sabbath, and how did they work that into their essentially responding to the culture of now, which is, I think, the culture that a lot of families deal with. So,
yes, true.
Yeah, that's definitely the demands of families, I think, are even higher than it is for older couples or for single people or couples without children. I just don't, I think it's a different, there's a whole other level of pressure to show up, to perform, and to produce that doesn't translate quite as strongly to people without kids.
Okay.
Real talk, messy faith, a lot of grace. This is Untangling Faith podcast with Tammy and Laura, and we are so glad that you're here.
Let's see, this other book, Sabbath in the Suburbs. One of the things that they wrestled with was the fact that Sunday was a work day for her. And then they had kids. Saturday was almost always sports, dance, activities, birthday parties, all of the minutia that isn't directly involved with their school, except for the sports part. But, all the extra stuff gets thrown in on Saturday. And so they tried to figure out how the heck they were going to find time to rest as a family. Now, she could, she said that she could take, and it's been a while since I've read this, so if she's watching, hi. But if she's watching, she'll be like, that's not exactly what I said. This is what I got when I'm carrying with it years later, is that you have to find those moments. You have to, and you don't have to have a whole day. You don't have to take a whole day. And Bruce Barkauer leaned into this too when he said, live Sabbathly. If you can't take an entire day to just be, then take moments. Take a half day when you're going to be very intentional about not doing anything that you don't want to do. I also looked at it. I know that there are a lot of Orthodox folks who will say on the Sabbath day, you're not supposed to do anything but sit. Anything that looks like work is work. Cooking is work. For me, cooking is a joy. I love it. I don't get to do it very often. And so sometimes on my Sabbath day, I just want to cook. And I own that because that's my joy. I find joy in that. That's because I am not a mom, a wife that has the expectation that I have to cook on the regular, right? So for me, cooking is a love language. Other people may not have that same feeling wrapped around. Either you don't love cooking, or because you have to cook 3 times a day, every single day, relentlessly, right? It's still not joyful.
I'm one of those people. I don't like cooking.
Yeah,
I cook because we need to eat.
Yeah.
My husband likes to cook. It's a creative process for him. So I am happy. We just in the last couple of days made an agreement that because he's been doing the cooking, like all the cooking since I had surgery last November. And because I haven't been able to use the left arm, and it's hard to cook if you can't use both hands. He's been doing all of it. And I said, here's the deal. Now that I'm better, I'm happy to let you keep doing the cooking, and I'll clean up the kitchen afterwards. So you cook, we'll eat, and then I'll clean up. And he's like, okay, because he hates the cleaning up part. I don't love the cleaning up part, but I love the letting him cook part.
Yeah.
So we have the things. We were in Israel on a Sabbath, and I remember we got on an elevator, And we thought something had broken with the elevator because it would go to a floor and open and shut and go to the next floor and open and shut. It didn't matter what you pushed, you had to go to every floor before you could get to where you wanted to go. And we really thought there was something wrong with the elevator. What we discovered was it had a Sabbath setting. So because Orthodox Jews pushing that button is work. And so the elevator took care of it for you. You just got on and got to ride. Now, there's a part of me, I do think they're a little legalistic about that, but they take their Sabbath seriously.
Yeah.
Sabbath is different. They were in the hotel eating for dinner because they didn't cook. And so it had already been cooked and they came and enjoyed and ate. And I always find it inspiring when I bump up against people who take something that seriously. I think it convicts me that I am sometimes too quick to say, well, I can just make it up, or maybe there's a lesson to be learned from being a little more committed to the idea of Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely go too far in either direction where we have no rest time, or we turn it into another set of checklists and stressors that keep us from really understanding the spirit of the law. And so in chapter 2, resistance to anxiety, Brueggemann talks about resistance, Sabbath as resistance. He says, it's unfortunate that in U.S. society, largely out of a misunderstood Puritan heritage, Sabbath has gotten enmeshed in legalism and moralism and blue laws and life-denying practices that contradict the freedom-bestowing intention of Sabbath. Such distortions, moreover, have led to endlessly wearying quarrels about Sunday activities such as movies and card playing, and currently in my state, purchasing liquor on Saturday. He said it amounts to a pitiful misrepresentation of Sabbath keeping as an art form. So then he goes on and he says that Sabbath is a bodily act of testimony to alternative and resistance to pervading values. And that is, it is an act of rebellion against the status quo. And so we tend to think that it has to be one way, but think about the reasons why God gave it to us in the first place. And that is to counteract this culture of hyper productivity at the expense of the human being.
And here's the reality that science backs up this idea of needing Sabbath, needing rest, needing pleasure and play, because we are more productive. There comes a point of diminishing return where if we just keep working without resting, we're producing less and less and less. We become less and less creative. We have less and less energy to think and to do things well. We see this in little ways of like having a hard time thinking about something, and we decide to go to the break room and get a glass of water or go make a pot of coffee. And the getting up and moving around and doing something different lets the solution pop up in our head. We are better and we can be more productive if we work less. I believe there are studies, I should have looked them up. It didn't occur to me because I didn't know I was going to talk about it, but there are studies that show that countries that have a work week that averages about 30 hours a week are more innovative, more creative, and produce more than those of us who have a 40 or longer hour work week. And it kills me to know that more than half of Americans do not take their vacation every year. We're not helping ourselves. We're not helping ourselves.
We're not helping ourselves, and we're not helping society. Even though society is telling us that we have to be like that, society is wrong, not just for the individual, but for society itself. It's a toxic.
And I do believe that there's a little bit of insidiousness under that, in that there are some forces at work that don't want us to be creative. They don't want us to be whole. We are more easily controlled if we are exhausted if we cannot think for ourselves, if we can't be creative. So there is some of that, but there's also a well-meaning part of that Protestant work ethic is just don't be lazy. And I come back to this because every generation has its flavor. And I think every older generation criticizes the newer generation. They don't like something about them. But we've criticized millennials for the way they think and the way they handle work. And I've raised two millennials. My parents were older, so they were part of that greatest generation. I technically am a Gen Xer, but I think more like a boomer because I was raised by that older generation. I'm married to a true Gen Xer, and we raised two millennial kids. My older son, Andrew, will tell you that he had no expectation. He's not sure he'll ever get to retire with Social Security, but he is not willing to work himself to death and sell his soul to a company for most of his life in hopes that he can then enjoy it in the later years. He takes his vacation. He and his wife have been intentional about doing some things they really wanted to do young, even though it meant sacrificing to save the money and to be able to do it. He also had no expectation that he would go to college and learn, and then he would go to work and do it because he said technology is moving too fast. You will have to always be learning. And I can't afford to just go to school. I'm going to have to be earning while I'm learning to be able to do that. So I actually think they may have a healthier rhythm and attitude toward work than some of the older generations do. Who they are is not going to be wrapped up in their job title, their position, or how much they make. They will work to live, not live to work.
There's also has been a lot of criticism of the millennials and now Gen Z as they entered the workforce because they quit their jobs when things get bad. Now, there's a healthy balance there. I think that I have seen folks that will just quit because I had a bad day, or I got mad at my boss, so fine, I quit. That's not healthy. But sitting down and evaluating whether or not it is worth the stress in your life that this job gives you, whether it's worth it to put up with an abusive boss or an abusive work system, or a toxic work environment. For example, they're talking about how hard it is to find waiters and waitresses, wait staff for restaurants now. And the criticism I always hear is, well, nobody wants to work anymore. And that is absolutely not true. What it is people are not willing to be abused at work anymore. They're not willing to sacrifice their mental health and their well-being for a job. They will go find a job that will pay them what they need and allow them to live the life that they feel called to live. And that's actually a really healthy way of functioning. There's also the mentality, I think I've seen this in the younger generations, where they do just get their feelings hurt and they quit. That's something else altogether different. But for people who are just simply not willing to put up with the BS and with the abuse, and human beings, as our culture becomes more, and I think we are becoming more and more abusive to one another. Customer service has become more and more and more a job of receiving abuse. That you have to be willing to accept the abuse with a smile. That's customer service now. That's terrible. And I think that the younger generations they're done with it. And I
think it's very much akin to what we were talking about with if you won't work, you shouldn't eat. Like there's a balance. Yeah. Like it's not about doing nothing, but it's also not about doing everything. It's not about not working at all or being too quick to leave and not work through something, or to get feedback that you needed that will grow and help you make you a better employee and person, and not staying in a toxic environment. Because we knew that like many of the work environments were dangerous, like working in the coal mines and those kinds of things. They damaged and killed the physical body. What we're now realizing is that a toxic environment can kill your soul, can be harmful too. And they're simply saying, nah, I'll find another way to earn money that doesn't involve you getting to do me harm.
Because they
So,
value quality of life, right? So
yes.
I sort of mocked the idea of what did I call it? The word they use for being present.
Pause right there. I gotta go to the bathroom.
All right.
I'll come right back.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hmm. Um, all right, so I want to talk a little bit about what Sabbath looks like in the modern time, what it can,
Okay.
um, because we've talked about that it used to be just taking Sunday and making everybody stop, which
Mhm.
I do find some value in that. I recognize that in order for me to have a break on a Sunday to go out to eat, that means that waiters and waitresses have to work that day, which I'm going to make another point about that too, by the way. And so they don't get to rest so that I can. I think that we need to be mindful of that
Mhm.
as we think Sabbathly. I think forcing everyone to just stop working on Sunday, that's not really that's not really it doesn't really work. I'm not really sure that that's helpful. And it is awfully legalistic. And there's a lot of people in this world that don't observe the Sabbath, and it's not part of their religious faith and all of that kind of thing. So,
And
um,
there are, even within the Christian community, there are people that still observe a Saturday Sabbath.
mhm,
So shutting everything down on Sunday would not benefit them. It would actually hurt them.
right, exactly. So there's that. But at the same time, I think that as Sabbath keepers, we have got to be aware of who in our midst is allowing us to keep our Sabbath and to be kind and respectful of that. Which brings me to this point of Sunday customers. I was in Aldi the other day and I was shopping. It was a Sunday afternoon and just picking up a few things for my dinner that night. And the cashier, I was like, "How are you? How are you doing?" And she goes, "Can't wait to get to the end of my shift." And I was like, "Yeah, it's Sunday, right?" She goes, "Oh no, that she said it's Sunday. It's always like this on Sunday." And I said, "Are people at least nice to you on Sunday?" And I knew the answer. And she said, "No, not at all. They're awful. They're the worst to you on Sundays." And she goes, and you would think that these people have just been to church and have been praising the Lord. You'd think they'd be in a good mood. Now that takes me back to when I waited tables right before I started seminary. I used to wait tables just because I needed something other than youth ministry to meet people my own age or whatever, and to be around other people. It's the only reason I was doing it. And I learned really quickly that church people are the absolute worst customers.
Mhm.
Here they come in a big, joyful group, all dressed in their Sunday best after worship, and they will do this large. By the way, folks, large tables are harder on your server. It makes it so much harder just to wait on a large table. Be patient with them. But here they come, and they've got their kids, and everybody's in their Sunday best, and they're ordering, and they're happy, and they're spending money, and blah blah blah, and they're also treating their servers like crap. They're rude. They're demanding. They're complaining. They're entitled. They act as if they deserve everything for some reason, and they set the worst example. Every Sunday, if I had
And
to
then
work,
they tend to tip poorly. We had friends in my home church who owned a restaurant, and they tried to open another branch of the restaurant in the town where we lived. And they couldn't get servers to work on Sunday. And so she was like, we're going to have to shut it down. It's just not going to work, because they were in Jacksonville where they had lots of college kids to work, and there was a constant group, and they didn't in Gadsden. But she said, we can't, our people won't work on Sunday. And I thought, well, I like that they'd like to go to church on Sunday. And nope, that was not it. She said they would rather wait on drunk people on Saturday night than church people on Sunday, because they are rude and they do not tip and they are difficult. And I really felt convicted by that. And so I've become I waited tables for a while too. Not in a traditional restaurant situation, but in some other settings. But it really made me aware of the message I was sending about Jesus by the way I behave, dressed like someone who's been to church on a Sunday. So I tend to be more patient and to tip more generously in that case, and not less.
even if you're not dressed for church on Sunday, if you're out on a Sunday and you're a Christian, the assumption is going to be that you've been to church that day. Even if you're not a Christian, all of those employees are going to assume that everyone who walks through their doors that day has been to church. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, whether they're Christian or not, they're representing Jesus. So if they're not Christian, whatever, that's not their problem. It's not their fault. But for those of us who are Christians, we have a higher standard to set, because it is typically a day of rest for us. And we then, in order to have our day of rest, depend on these people giving up their day of rest as a sacrifice to us. And we have no right, in the eyes of God, as followers of Christ, as human beings, as American citizens, pick a category. We have no right to treat people badly any day of the week. But on Sunday, when they have given up their day of rest so that we can have ours, we should be extra appreciative, extra gracious, extra loving, extra tipping, all of those things that we should give back a little bit, and to be more thankful to them for that, so that we can have our rest. And that is a part of thinking Sabbathly, of living in the Sabbath mindset. That idea that God says that on the Sabbath, not even the animals or the foreigners should work, because everyone deserves that time. And to be treated with respect, the same respect that everybody deserves.
Yes, I agree.
That's part of the Sabbath mindset.
One of the helpful things that I was told, I have no idea where it came from, but is that to think of the day as having 3 sections: morning, afternoon, and evening, and to try not to ever work more than 2 of those. So if you work morning and afternoon, your evening is your own. If you know you're going to have to work into the evening, you take the morning for your own. If you had morning and evening things going on, carve out some time in the middle of the day for yourself. And if you have a day where you have to work all 3, then you're going to want to make up that part of the day within the same 7 days. That really became the key to getting the flow in your body. Early in seminary, we had to take 2 classes: Kingdom, Church, and World, and Vocation of Ministry. And in Vocation of Ministry, those were the 2 classes that I think my seminary added that made our MDiv 6 hours longer than the other MDivs, which is why they're ingrained in my brain. But Vocation of Ministry was about how you set yourself up to have a long, healthy vocation of ministry. I'll also recommend Eugene Peterson books: A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. What was it? It's no, that one's not by Peterson, but Eat This Frog. I think But a long obedience in the same direction is about how to be in ministry for a long time and not burn yourself out and to be faithful continually. But we had to establish a rule of life of how we would protect our health, our integrity, and our relationship with God while doing ministry. They made a big deal out of the difference of working for God and being with God. And so generally the rule we established was 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year. So 1 hour a day that is dedicated to being with God and just being and not producing anything. 1 day a week, whether that comes in 3 portions or one whole 24-hour period, and 1 week. And I was so thrilled to find out in our book of discipline that guides our church that we're entitled to a week of continuing education to do that in addition to our vacation. I was like, how did I not know this from the beginning?
Yeah.
So now I try to make sure everybody knows it from the beginning. But I think that rule of life has been, and now going on 25 years later, I still see the benefit of that 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the way that I like to keep Sabbath is different depending on the day in the week. Sometimes just answering the phone and talking to a member of my church takes away from my Sabbath, even though it's just a conversation, even though it's just a minute. If it makes me feel stressed, like I'm learning to read my body and to read my feelings in order to understand where my boundaries are. And so that's, in relationships and whatever, but that's also on my Sabbath day. If I think about doing something and I'm trying to be really intentional about my Sabbath, because there are days when I'm not great at it. I will stop and go, is this something I really want to do? And if it isn't, I won't. So there are some Sabbaths where I will get up in the morning and I go from the bed to the couch and I read a book all day, or I listen to an audiobook all day. So I don't even have to use the effort to hold my hands up. It's just, and I'll just read a book all day, and I'll go into the kitchen and I'll get something to eat what I want. Sometimes I'll get up and I want to bake cookies for everybody at church. That hasn't happened in a while. So if anyone in my church is looking at this, they're going, we haven't gotten any cookies lately, but there was a time, one time I was like, I just want to bake for the church, or bake for my friends, or bake for my family, or bake for me. I want to eat, whatever. And so I will. I just want to go to the dog park with my boyfriend. I just want to do whatever. And it can be just a really beautiful way to think about it. Yes, of course, there are Sabbath days when I have to do laundry, or there are Sabbath days when I have to go out and do this grunge work or whatever that I have to do. But most of the time I try really hard to let it be something that fills my soul and something that is life-giving. I love those soul-filling and life-giving descriptive phrases. Is this soul-filling? Does this fill my cup? Does this give life to my life, to my world? And if the answer is yes, then that's Sabbath activity. For me, going to a party is not Sabbath activity. Generally speaking, I love parties. I love throwing parties. I love having parties. I love going to parties. And they are soul-filling and life-giving in certain ways, but those are not restful activities. I usually need time to recover from those, probably because I'm more of an introvert than I've ever been in my entire life. But they don't fill me up in the same way of giving me energy for the rest of the week that rest and relaxation does.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think about what I like to do on my Sabbath. And then I have to watch some of it and make sure that it doesn't become work in doing it. I like creating the stuff that I post on social media. And so I will sometimes spend Sabbath doing that, but then I will have days where I'm like, I'm not in the mood.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah. Sometimes
There's
writing my,
always, there
sometimes
is always something else on the list to do. There is always more items than I've never have it all crossed off. Like there is nothing else for me to do.
yeah,
But I have to watch that even the things I want to do don't become work. It's okay sometimes just to be unproductive.
yeah, it is okay. And, it's interesting. At 51, I now have people in my social group who are moving into the age of retirement. And so it's not just older folks in my life who have retired, but it's my own peers who are starting to think about or have actually aged into retirement now at this point. And to watch them begin to try and figure out who they are at this Sabbath period of life without work, who are they? And where do they find their worth? And people have a really hard time feeling like they have value or that they have worth if they're not producing something. And
Because that's what we taught them.
it is. It is. And so it's a terrible testament to our culture and to the church, because if the church has not taught people how to push back against the culture, then we're just part of the problem. And I think we go back to that with you, the fact that the church has tried to have something every single day of the week. There's always some activity. There's always something to keep them busy. And what I've observed as pastor is that the church has to figure out how to be the church for the people without contributing to the same worldly pressures that they are getting from every other angle of their lives.
Yeah.
There's that pressure that they have to be here on every Sunday. And as a pastor who's trying to grow a small church, that is a thing. It's important for the life of the church, for the members to be here and to show up, but not because they have something that they have to do. Like, I want my members to be here because they find spiritual rest here, not because, well, I have to serve or I have to do this or I have, like it's my job to be there. So therefore it becomes one more thing each week when I have to go, which then means that on the days that they don't have a job to do, they choose to stay home because they're just tired. Like church needs to figure out how to become a place that feeds the soul rather than saps it dry. And so I try and read my members, and like, especially during and immediately after COVID, it was very, very difficult because the entire planet was exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember thinking, how do I take a vacation during COVID? And I never needed a vacation more than I did after the first 3 months of COVID, of lockdown. From March until July was the most exhausting few months of my life, because the learning curve was intense about trying to figure out how do you be present. And so I was exhausted. And they're like, how are you tired? You haven't left your house. Well, how do you take a vacation when you can't leave your house? And when your house is where you work and all that kind of stuff. So I had to really figure that out, how to be in my house on vacation and not working and, all of that. But
so for me, that time I was in an extension ministry appointment. I was running a nonprofit where most of our grants had told us we still had all the same expectations for delivering services and getting numbers of people served when you can't be with anybody. And we served a community that technology was not there. Some of them didn't have internet at home. Like it was stressful. And I made the transition back into the church world in the middle of that. I came to the church I met the first Sunday in July of 2020. So all the things that you normally do to meet people and get to know them and integrate into the life of a new congregation, we couldn't do. And we were working so very hard. I remember our people saying, we just are so anxious to get back to doing all the stuff we were doing before. And we're like, holy cow, we're exhausted because of all the stuff we've been doing. Like we had to learn how to be radio personalities, TV personalities, technical professionals.
Podcaster.
I remember my children's minister delivering Easter stuff to the homes of all of our children because she couldn't have an egg hunt. She created a drive-through egg hunt at the camp that we own because she couldn't have a traditional egg hunt. There was a lot of creativity around it, but it also left us exhausted. So the coming back from COVID, where so much of the world had changed and shifted, you then had clergy who were exhausted and a whole world that didn't know why. Like, why are you not ready to hit the ground running? Why do you not want to do your job anymore? We've been doing our job. This wasn't a 4-month Sabbath for us. This was hard. So it's been really challenging. I, however, am one of those people, when my people tell me they're tired and they need a break, I let them have a break.
Oh, yeah.
When they say I need to step away from this position, okay, understand I hate to see you go. I've enjoyed working with you, but if you need a break, I want you to take a break because I think that's a healthy thing to do. Now, what happens is sometimes my people ask for a break, but they wanted to be begged to stay. And then they're deeply disappointed that I didn't, not because I didn't want them to stay in the position, but you asked for something. And I gave you what you asked for because you ought to be able to ask for what you want.
Our job is to meet people where they are. And if they misrepresent where they are, then we can't do anything about that.
There you go. That's a great way to say that. But I also have people who talk about, because the attendance has changed. Used to, an active member of a congregation came 3 out of 4 weeks out of a month. Now, people who come once every 6 weeks consider themselves active members of a congregation. I think we need worship. And the reason I do is not, I do, my denomination measures it by attendance and giving as well. And I have to really fight against those metrics. But I think the world spends, we get 168 hours a week. And I think the world tells us who we are. And 1 hour or so a week, 1 to 3 hours of coming back to let God tell us who we are is helpful. That's a good rhythm. It's also an act of resistance to that to come. But I'm not going to shame people. And I'm not going to chase you. Like, if you think you need to be doing something else more than you need to be here, I may disagree with you, but I won't try to drag you here or shame you and get you to be here. I want you to want to be here.
Well, for 2 reasons. One, people need rest. And we live in a world that pulls on people in so many different ways. That even with our eyes closed, we can't rest anymore because there is so much coming at us. There's so much information. There are so many requests. There are so many demands. There are so many things coming at us that this world is so exhausting. I'm not sure God even understands what's happening. You know what I mean? Like, this is not the world Jesus walked in. I'm wondering if there's if God has a difficulty even going, what is, but the other reason is because it's counterproductive to put a lot of pressure on a person and to guilt them into being in church. It may work in the short term. Long term, they're just going to be more apt to pull away.
We move away from shame. We move away from things and people who make us feel ashamed. And so if church makes you feel ashamed, you will at the first opportunity stop going to church. So it's not in the long run helpful. I do sometimes challenge people to think in terms of, why will we sacrifice worship for work? But we will sacrifice worship for play, but we won't sacrifice work for worship or play. The thing I think we ought to sacrifice is the work.
Yeah.
To have time to play or rest and time to worship. Those are the things that would be more helpful to us. But too often, worship is one of the things. And I think part of it is because that worship has shamed them, has made them feel ashamed, and made them, in that same vein, they're supposed to be working when they go to church. Where are you serving? Where are you volunteering? And again, there's a balance between not just being a consumer, where you just sit in a pew and are a consumer of religious goods and services, but you're part of that. There is a part, because very often we need more volunteers than we have. We tend to go back to the same volunteers and overuse them, and they pull back and stop coming because they just don't want to do anymore. They
Right.
need a break, which is why if you ask me for a break, I will give you a break.
And I
And
think
I may not have any idea, and I may have a little bit of panic inside about how I'm going to get done the stuff you wanted a break from, but I will give you the break.
yeah,
Because if I ever ask for a break, I'm at the point to where it's fixing to not be optional.
right. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that churches need to start thinking too. And one of the things that I've started learning after, especially after COVID, but I think I was already on this track before all that happened. Um, and that is, if the members of the church, um, first of all, are dreading an activity, then we need to evaluate whether or not we should be doing the activity in the first place. There's that. Secondly, if people in the church are too tired to do an activity, then we need to evaluate whether or not we should be doing that activity. And so, like, it was funny when I first got here, right off the bat, I get here, this was 12 some years ago, and I come in, guns blazing, whatever, all just so ready to go, just so excited and excited, and let's vision for the future. Now, this congregation has been in a search process for over a year now. When I get there, the entire defining characteristic of a search and call process is visioning for the future, trying and doing all of that visioning work. Who are we? Who does God call us to be? Where does God call us to go? Where are we supposed to be in 5-10 years? Who do we need to lead us to that place? By the time I got there, they were exhausted. And so I was doing a webinar on visioning and planning for the future or whatever. And I typed in to the question at the end, what do you do when your church is too tired to vision? And the keynote speaker went, oh my God, that's profound. And he suggested, I don't know, this was so long ago, a sabbatical year. And that was one of those things that just sort of like, it landed in my soul so perfectly and beautifully that it was just like clink. That was so right. And we took a Sabbath year off, a Sabbath rest. And I proposed this to the congregation. Of course, they were anxious at first because they thought, well, nobody will come to church, first of all. Because at that point we were functioning as if you didn't have a job, then you wouldn't come. And it was true. And everybody had a job and everybody saw church as a second job, which that's not life-giving. Then the other thing was they were afraid that, so I said, okay, fine, let's do it for 6 months. At June, we will reevaluate. And then we will. So in 2024, no, I'm sorry, 2014, we took a Sabbath year. We had no meetings unless it was necessary. So all meetings were called as needed, no scheduled meetings for the year. There were no mission activities, no outreach activities, nothing like that. There were fellowship got whittled down to something that was sustainable, where people donated cookies and goldfish crackers and juice. And whoever happened to be there would just pull it out of the fridge and out of the cupboards. And that would be our fellowship time. So nobody was signing up to bring fellowship food. Nobody was there. None of it. All we were doing was worshiping and studying the Bible and hanging out together. It was the most life-giving experience. And it's really funny. I looked it up, a Sabbath year. And it's really funny because all of the material that I found, which was not a lot, but it gave you these really rigid breakdowns about how to have a Sabbath year, or a sabbatical year, how to evaluate and measure progress. And it was the most stressful reading I had ever done because it turned it into something hard. And I went, nope. And we literally just made our way with it and just did it our own way. There was no model, there was no whatever. We just rested and worshiped. And
So I'm over here thinking, now we have said before that sometimes we process out loud on this podcast, and that sometimes even as we say it, we go, oh, yeah. But I'm over here wondering, we've talked about seasons and talking about a sabbatical year and about God working 6 days and resting on the seventh. I'm wondering if there's not a rhythm and seasons to the life of the church, if we shouldn't think about every 7 years going fallow. Because I'm thinking when we planted the congregation, this is interesting. I didn't know that this would come into play when I chose this mug. Maybe the Holy Spirit did. We got advice because what we did was take 2 congregations and put them together to create a new church. And it was called a vital merger. And so we were told to do 5 things: get a new pastor, a new name, a new mission and vision statement, a new location, and to go fallow for 6 months, which meant close both churches, worship, fellowship, plan, dream, spend time together. Don't advertise. Don't think about outreach. Don't get form and structure yet. Just be together for 6 months. And then you will begin to work on it. Now that one, our conference wouldn't let us do. So we didn't do it. And I think it was we would have been better off if we had. But maybe every 7 years, churches ought to think about going fallow for a minute and refueling, taking in more nutrients, worship, study, conversation, fellowship, bonding as a people to see what's next. Or maybe it's an annual rhythm. Maybe there's a season where we just turn inward to renew ourselves, and a season where we are really looking out. I'm processing that out loud, but I'm wondering if maybe we try the same tactic in the church of being always equally productive in every season. Every Sunday has to be as good as every other Sunday. Every season in the life of the church has to be good and meaningful and purposeful. Maybe that's unrealistic.
I think it is unrealistic. I think it's a worldly expectation, not a godly one. And this idea of taking a Sabbath year was radical. Everybody that I told about it was like, wait, what? Tell me more about this. It was interesting because when I suggested it to my leadership, every single one of them went, yes. The only people that pushed back were the ones that were afraid that nobody would come back. And so that's why I said, let's do it for 6 months, reevaluate, and keep going if we want to. And if not, we'll end it in, June. And if we like it, we'll end it in December. And it was funny. By the end of that June, we love it. Let's keep going. By November, we had so much energy. They were restless to get started, to get back to work. They were restless and I had to pull them back and say, yes, we will do that. Let's do that in January. We have 2 more months to rest. And they're like, that's the energy you want. You know what I mean?
We talk about now how many people have the Sunday dreads. They don't want to go back to work on Monday. And so it ruins Sunday evening just because they're like, oh, God, I have to go to work tomorrow. That's not the way we should feel. Our days off, our Sabbath should renew and refill us to be ready to work again. And I think the same thing needs to be true in the life of the church and in all the parts of our life. Is the things we are doing with our time off, with our Sabbath, need to be things that refill, that are soul filling and renewing, so that we are anxious to go back and give the energy that we have, to use it and see what comes of the ideas that we're having. That would be a healthy rhythm of life.
In 2022, I took my third sabbatical of my career. And you and I have talked about this, have you ever had a sabbatical?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So
We have to be at a particular congregation for 7 years before we can qualify for it. So not just 7 years of ministry, but 7 years at the same church
I think that's a
before
flaw.
we can ask for a
I think that's a
sabbatical.
flaw.
And very few of our ministers are ever at the same church
Right.
for 7 years.
I think that's a flaw that sets you up for failure. But
I do too.
also, I think that the traditional way of doing sabbaticals for pastors is every 7 years. And so even in those of us who serve in other churches, in other denominations where we don't get moved quite as often as you guys do, I think that it's an unreasonable expectation. First of all, the idea is you get 3 months off every 7 years paid. With a stipend that covers that, and then people will do all kinds of different things. And that's great. I somehow, when I went into my first ministry job, when I was in Florence, realized chances of me being here for 7 whole years were slim. And I wanted my sabbatical. So I negotiated a month off every 4 years. And so I got a month sabbatical at that church as an associate pastor. And it was phenomenal. And if I had tried to wait 7 years, I was only in that church for 5 years, right? So I wouldn't have gotten that 7-year sabbatical. When I came here, I negotiated for 6 weeks. So a month and a half every 4 years. Or every 5 years, 6 weeks every 5 years. Now, my church liked it because that meant that they didn't have to hire an interim for the 3 months that I was gone. So that saved them money and effort. I like it because I get a sabbatical every 5 years now instead of every 7. 6 weeks for me is the perfect amount of time. By the end of the 6 weeks, I am renewed and ready to go back to work. And I think it's because I get them so frequently. So I'm one of the few pastors that I know, clergy people, who actually has had, I've been in ministry now 24 years ordained, and I've had 3 sabbaticals. It's a really good run. The last sabbatical I had was in 2022, and that was right after COVID. And I realized that I had been quiet quitting was a term that had been coined post COVID, which is it's the act of going to work, but doing the bare minimum because you're just so burned out that you can't do anymore. So you're quitting, but not really, right? So I realized once I learned what quiet quitting was, I realized I had been doing it. I was phoning in my job. I was so tired. I was literally just throwing one foot in front of the other. I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to do my job. And I decided to take my sabbatical. I actually thought I was going to quit my job. And I decided at that time to take the sabbatical before I left because it was time. I was 2 years overdue for it. It was time for it. I wanted to have it and I deserved it, but I knew I wouldn't get it if I moved now. When I came back from that sabbatical, not only was I rested, I also didn't want to leave my job anymore. I no longer wanted to quit my job. And so when I came back with a whole new sense of energy and a whole new way of thinking about ministry. It's literally the turning point for my entire style of ministry, a more Sabbathly minded, worshipful, spirit-filled ministry that is less about productivity and more about leading people into relationship with God. And the church went with me, which is just miraculous that this congregation would go with me through a change like that, because most churches freak out at change. They do not like change. And this church is absolutely phenomenal when it comes to accepting change. I don't know they are a unicorn of a congregation. We're small, we don't have any money and all this kind of stuff, but the people here are absolutely phenomenally remarkable. And I can't believe we don't have more people because it's that great. But anyway, we have shifted into a way of functioning that is much more Sabbath-minded. I'll pause there for a second because I did a lot of talking. I'm good at that.
Yeah, I think we may be getting the point of kind of wrapping this up.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. So one
But
example,
I
but
think
one, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just thinking that Sabbath is essential. It is not a luxury. It should not be an afterthought. It is something essential for us, for all of us, not just clergy, but for all human beings. We have to have seasons of work and seasons of rest. And we have to have time to renew and to have pleasure and to relax.
Yeah.
And Sabbath is the churchy word for doing that.
Yeah. I think I had two more points really quick. One was one of the most recently an example of how our church functions Sabbathly, I think. Last year we were doing this thing called the Makers Market, and the goal was to do them every month. And for a while we did them every month. They were amazing. And then they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so for the last 3 Makers Markets, they were just this massive production every month. And then we took some time off for that, for the holidays, for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that. Our last one was at Halloween. And when we came back and we reevaluated, no one wanted to do it anymore. Now, the way I asked that at the leadership team meeting was, let me ask you something. Because I was asking about it and they're all like, yeah, we need to do that. They were using the word need, not want. And yeah, we need to get back into this. And so we need to do this. And I noticed that I had scheduled a couple of meetings, and my first inclination was nobody had responded to my text message about setting a meeting date. That's the first indication that nobody really wants to do it. And the second one was that they would get this sort of tight look around their eyes when we talk about it. And so at the meeting, I said, in your gut, when I say, when do you want the next Makers Market to be? What is the exact feeling in your gut, in your stomach, in your body when you think about it? Is it joyful and life-giving, or is it soul-sucking and anxiety-ridden? And they go, soul-sucking and anxiety-ridden. I said, then we're not doing it anymore. And they went, really? Just like that? Just like that. God's going to call us to do something different. And they were like,
how many things has God called us to do that we have missed doing because we wouldn't let go of what we had always done? We need to get back to doing that. Sabbath teaches us to listen to those responses and hear the voice of God behind them.
Yeah.
To be able to listen to God saying, that's enough of that. That was a season, time, a purpose. Now there will be a new one. There are new things for you to do, not added on to, but genuinely instead of some other things. The clarity that I've had around vocation and career and whether I should go or stay have had to do with having time to do that.
Right.
After we merged the church, the other thing the conference didn't do was give them a new pastor. The co-pastor and I prepared them to get a new pastor, and they came back and said they wanted me to stay and lead them until they were stable. Well, it quickly became clear that that was not going to be good for them. It also was not good for me because I had been over functioning. And God opened a door, and I was able to step into what we call an extension ministry. And I remember talking about how much I loved that I went to work every morning with my Yeti mug and my keys. And I went to work, and at 4 o'clock, I got my Yeti and my keys, and I went home. I didn't take work home. I didn't do work on the couch. I worked at work and I was home at home. Now, I like the boundaries a little blurrier than that. I like to be able to sermon plan on my sofa. So my last year there, I took a church part-time because of that part that I missed. But being able to have work at work and home at home gave me the bandwidth to discover, you know what I'm doing here at this nonprofit is ministry. I'm making a difference in the world, but it's not the particular ministry to which I'm called. I'm called to be in the church, preaching and teaching and leading and forming people more directly as Christians in the example of Jesus. it gave me the room to do that. So Sabbath gives us the bandwidth to make better decisions when we're not on Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the healthiest thing we can do. It is. I think the younger generations are better at it than the older generations. My last thought was about when I first started working. My first job out of seminary was working for a college. That generally was one of those where you go home. And of course, we were at work a lot more than most people because college hours are different. So we're working at night, all of that. It was different. But working at the church, I came in, and in my seminary training, I had been taught to set very clear boundaries for yourself. And it was part of our pastoral care training, was equally taking care of yourself as well as taking care of the congregation and modeling all of that. And it was just a part of my DNA. It also fit my generation and, whatever. So when I came in, I took my days off, and my days off, I was home. I didn't come in on my days off. Or when I took my vacation, I turned off. Apparently, my secretary, who was used to my over-functioning senior pastor, expected the same behavior from me that she got from him. And she went to him to complain, expecting to find an ally, that I wasn't working hard enough. And he, in his wisdom, and I love this person, this is Carl, who met last season, told her, no, I'm the unhealthy one in this situation. She's the healthy one. She's the one who's taking care of herself and taking her time off. I'm the one who doesn't ever take the time off, and you're always yelling at me that I need to take care of myself better. You know what I mean? And so I appreciated his wisdom there.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate the wisdom of my younger counterparts who understand even better than I do the need for Sabbath rest. And for that healthy living Sabbathly mentality of just pacing yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to get to the end of this life. Well, we have to learn to pace ourselves. Take those water breaks. When you come to the water station, stop and drink the water. Do those things. Do what you need to do. Set a rhythm that you can maintain for the entire period of your life. Because if you try and sprint through it, you're going to collapse long before you get to the end.
Yeah.
So, all right.
All right.
We love everybody. Go rest. Live Sabbathly. Love your life. Next week, I'm taking vacation. And then, of course, y'all won't know that because we'll already be posting these videos that we've already pre-recorded. But next week, I'm taking a week off to go on vacation. Tammy's taking 2 weeks off.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
16 days.
Yeah. So we're taking a 3-week hiatus on recording. But we overfunctioned ahead of time to get these recordings done so that we could keep posting recordings while we're out of pocket. But anyway, we love you. We're going to go rest, and you do the same. Bye, everyone. Bye.
All right. You got a lot to work with there.
Yeah.
I think we've got like 2 hours of material.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right.
We got to cut some of it out but yeah. All right. I got to move on to the next thing.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this conversation about Sabbath rest and pacing yourself has inspired you to find your own rhythm of work and rest. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend who really might need to hear this message. You can also connect with us on our Untangling Faith Podcast Facebook page and at untanglingfaithpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear how you're living Sabbathly in your own life. Until next time, take care of yourself, pace your journey, and live with intention. We'll see you soon.